Welcome to Everything Under the Moon.
With Mel and Stell.
Hello, everyone. We are on our first podcast after 6 hours. We finally got our equipment to work, and now we're recording starting at 8:51 p.m. We are going to be talking today about a woman who was found, a grave that was found in Iceland from the Viking settlement age, and I'm taking, mostly all this information is coming from a scientific paper that came out in 2019 called Tangled Up in Blue, The Death, Dress, and Identity of an Early Viking Age Settler from Ketilsstaðir, Iceland. Ketilsstaðir, I don't know. It's a farm. It means Ketil's Farm in Iceland, and it is on the east coast of Iceland. And this woman's grave is really cool. It's one of the most ornate graves they found in Iceland, and some of her skin tissue and teeth was preserved. So we're able to learn a lot from her remains. So
how did they find her?
It was a construction project.
Uh-huh.
So here we go. So they actually damaged one of her brooches, like as they were tearing up the road.
So sad.
It is very sad, but I don't think they
would
have found her. Yeah,
I guess if that's the price of having to find her, but still, it's a damn shame.
It is a damn shame.
Yeah, I hate to see it.
I hate to see it. And I think we just need to add a disclaimer, because Norse religion and paganism and history has been infiltrated by fucking Nazis, okay? And we do not tolerate Nazis, and we want nothing to do with Odinism and folkism. There are so many dog whistles that I am ignorant to.
Shame.
Yeah, it's really horrible. I mean, there are a lot of symbols and runes and stuff that have been, taken. There are a lot of historical heritage stuff that have been taken by these hate groups.
We take the Keanu Reeves philosophy of being excellent to each other. Like, that's...
I have absolutely zero tolerance for it. So
yeah.
Just a little bit about Iceland, like as a country, geologically, because that's what I'm into. They have 200 volcanoes, one of which is currently volcanoing, exploding.
Yeah, love it.
It's going off right now, and
volcano's gonna volcano.
I do follow from the show Vikings. We're gonna have to bring it up. Her name is Gunhild in the show, but her name is Raga Ragnar-daughter. I don't know. Anyway, I follow her on Instagram. She lives in Iceland. She's Icelandic, and she's just always modeling in front of this molten lava. She's just like standing on a rock, like, I'm so beautiful. And she is. She's like an Amazon woman. I mean, she's like 6'4". I mean, if there's anyone who exemplifies a Viking descendant, it's this woman. Anyway, I have a crush on her.
That's great. Yeah, I feel it. It's getting tense.
You can feel the energy.
Yep, I feel it.
But anyway, they have volcanoes. They have more hot springs and solfataras than any other country in the world.
Oh, that is my thing.
Yeah,
I'm telling you, the best day of my life was when I one time went up to Crystal Park in Montana and went way high up in the mountains, like to the point that you would get out of breath really easily, like just trying to walk around because the air's starting to get thinner. Spent the whole day out there digging these huge ass quartz crystals out of the ground, like just beautiful crystals, and you just stick your shovel in the ground and they just pop out. And we collected a bunch of those and then ended the day at the hot springs. And they had like several different pools that were all fed by the hot springs. And they started at the top at the hottest. And then as you went down, they got cooler and cooler. And
were they like man-made?
These ones were, yes. It was more like they made... So this one in particular on that day was like a man-made one that was fed by the water of the springs. But I've also been to ones where they just kind of cemented the springs. They just turned the spring itself into like a pool. Kind of dug
I went to some in New Mexico that were like spas almost. Yeah. Like they piped it in and then they had like gravel. And then I went to one in Utah that was literally just like a lava hole in the ground. And like someone had actually died there. Like a guy, they warned you not to like dive, not to go like put your head under basically. Oh, no. So like the top was wide and a bunch of people could get in it. And when we went, it was packed. It was like 15 of us and like 20 other Mexican families in this one, everyone was like literally face to face. Now thinking about COVID, it just sounds terrifying.
Right? It's all
but
a
they
new
were,
lens, huh? To look at the whole world, really.
I know, it's a whole different perspective now. But yeah, they told you not to like get your feet stuck because this guy got his foot stuck diving down. He drowned. It was terrifying. So anyway,
hot springs are always a thing. Like,
don't
if you're
die
ever
in a hot spring in Iceland.
If you're ever out traveling and you have an opportunity to do hot springs, I would definitely don't pass it up.
The only native land mammal at the time of Viking settlement in Iceland was the fox.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, I don't know what they were eating. Maybe they were eating fish and stuff and like.
I bet the woods smelled terrible.
The woods?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
With the fox piss, like the worst smell. I don't know. Foxes are one of those animals. So when I think of them, I think of how stinky their piss is.
They are. And then there's people who try to keep them in their house.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, your house is covered in
That's
piss.
Insanity. So basically the only mammal running around is foxes.
Yeah. And they had, the only forest was birch forest.
What year?
So it was.
What time frame are we in again?
The first settlers supposedly came in 874. So 874 AD. So there was a settlement found on the east coast of Iceland near where the woman in blue was buried. And it's dated to the early 800s. Mm-hmm. Sounds so weird just saying a 3-digit number. Mm-hmm. The 800s. So my theory there's a lot of different theories on how they got there. Basically, I think that the Norse probably had temporary settlements, and I got this idea from this paper. This is not my genius shining through. Yeah. I agree with these people that they probably had seasonal, like summer, establishments on Iceland, and then would go back for the winter before they permanently settled there. I mean, it just makes more sense logically.
Sure, yeah.
So that's kind of how they got there. There's a lot of reasons that the Vikings came. You know, they were escaping taxation by King Harald Finehair. There wasn't a lot of farmable land in Scandinavia, so they were just searching for land to farm, because the Vikings were really just farmers who would go raiding as like a hobby. Nice. That's where Viking comes from. It's Vikinger is the technical word, or the Old Norse word. And it just meant it was a verb. It was like, we're going to go Vikinger, like we're going to raid and pillage and go steal some shit.
Nice.
Yeah. She's buried with a lot of Freya type goods. So they kind of theorize in the paper that I'm reading that she was probably a worshiper of Freya, and we'll tie into my theory about
and
Freya.
For the uninitiated, who's Freya?
Right. Freya is a Norse goddess of war, love, women's magic, all beautiful jewelry.
Sex,
all kinds of the best stuff in life, really.
Probably chocolate too, knowing her.
Yeah, right. Like all the goodies in life.
Versace robes.
She is known to have a chariot of cats pulled by Norwegian forest cats.
Love it.
And when her husband is away, she cries tears of gold for him.
Wow.
There's a 68% probability that the date of her birth was between 891 and 965 AD. So the earliest settlers came in 874. That's the recorded date. So she was born well after the first settlers, and then the people from the 800s were way before her, like those temporary settlers. So let's get into it. Let me start looking. Keep staring at my notes.
Get technical.
Yeah.
Please, get technical.
Awesome. When she was found in 1938, she was, from the clothes that were preserved, they assumed that she was a Norse woman who was of Viking descent. And that was what they assumed about her. It's only in 2015 when they found her skin and teeth that had been preserved, were they able to tell that her diet had been different and not necessarily that of a normal Norwegian person. They also made some inferences from her jewelry. We'll later talk about the jet that she was found with that are, from the Scottish Isles. And that we know that there were Viking settlements in the Scottish Isles around that time. So yeah, this is kind of in the point of the Viking period. It's kind of at its peak, at least in my opinion. Like the Vikings in England and Ireland, they only really lasted for about 200 years after that. And then in 1100, King Harold, I think the Viking period technically ends when King Harold converts to Christianity. Mm-hmm. and they stop, like they become one country rather than a bunch of, because before they were just like a bunch of little tribes and clans like going out on Viking raids. Like Viking raids were probably just like 6 or 7 or, you know, that's probably a small amount, but like 10 to 15 guys, you know, of a clan. We always see on TV like these epic
They were
battles.
just assimilated, huh?
Yeah, I mean, they just were kind of grouped into one country, and the country technically converted to Christianity, but you know, I'm sure there was a weird hybrid for about 500 years because, and obviously a lot still carried over.
I'm sure that was a really pleasant time to be around religious upheaval.
Oh God, that's one of the things I'm very happy for in our modern world, is that there is religious strife, but there isn't, like in my personal life. I'm kind of privileged.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
And I don't have to deal with it. That's what this comes down to.
Yeah, well,
We're
that's
privileged.
great.
There's a kind of a special reason why we have found some of her skin. You know, obviously, this is 1,000 years old, and you don't just find 1,000-year-old teeth in the ground. They decompose way before that happens. And especially in Iceland, the soil is especially, I think they said acidic, and it eats up remains really fast, literally eats it up. Her jaw and cheek were preserved because when she was laid on her left side in the ground, the brooch that pinned her apron to her smock fell against her face and cheek, and that preserved the fabric that was attached to the brooch. The copper alloy is what preserved the fabric in her skin.
Yeah,
but
it has like antimicrobial properties, right?
Exactly.
That's amazing that it was able to preserve flesh, cloth, and teeth for hundreds of years.
Yeah, and
it doesn't even sound believable. It's like
No,
you're kidding me.
Yeah, it doesn't sound real, and it blows my freaking mind. I mean, obviously we're doing this whole thing about it because it's just so cool. So yeah, it preserved the fabric that was attached to the pin of the brooch and part of her cheek and one of her teeth, or some of her teeth, and put that in a jar of formaldehyde and then found it again later. And we can tell a lot of things from her teeth. So they basically can tell when she moved to Iceland because of how her diet changed. We know that this was a tooth that formed when she was 2 to 3 years old, and they calibrate their estimations for that age. And they think that she was raised on a terrestrial protein diet, so terrestrial land mammals are what she's eating. Between the ages of 5 to 10, her diet significantly changed from terrestrial protein to half marine and half terrestrial protein. So she's essentially eating half fish now.
Okay.
So they make a couple assumptions. Let me talk about her clothes a little bit first, because so you should just know that's what they assumed from her teeth physically. There were 4 types of fabric found attached to her brooch, which kind of speaks to her wealth. The first type they determined was a cirque, and that's the word for like an undershirt, like a linen kind of smock. Like it was really what women wore for thousands of years under their fancy dresses, was like a linen underdress. They found a smocker, which is, that apron pinafore thing that we see on Vikings, and that was dyed blue with woad.
Like Raggedy Ann.
Yes, exactly.
That's always what I think of when someone mentions that kind of piece of clothing.
I wonder if that has any significance. I have no idea if Raggedy Ann has Scandinavian roots. Because the pinafore apron thing is a traditional German thing too.
What
like
about
Germanic.
the gingham too?
The gingham?
It's gingham and...
Gingham is like a 1940s American thing.
Yeah, that's what I figured. I just always really loved Raggedy Ann and Raggedy Andy when I was younger.
They're cute.
Thanks.
I always thought they were creepy, but to each his own. The apron is decorated with the wool tab band, which has the cream and brown stripe that we know was like an Icelandic type of weave. So there was another type of fabric found, which was a herringbone twill, which is kind of fancy. And
sounds like it.
They don't know whether that was another part of her apron, like her apron had several types of fabric in it, or if it was a shawl that was so decomposed they couldn't identify. But overall, 4 different types of fabric. And it's kind of cool. So the clothes are woven in different ways, and the way the yarn is spun is in different tradition and technique. And I don't know a ton about spinning yarn, But her linen cirque was made in a Norwegian spin way. It's called a ZZ spun type, and a diamond twill. And that was Norwegian, so that could have been imported, from Norway or the British Isles, made by Norwegian hands. But also, some of her clothes were made with a ZS spun technique, which was typical to the British Isles and Ireland. So, she could have had family. So, because of all of this, they conclude that she could have been born in the northern Scottish Isles in a Viking colony, or traveled there as a very young child from Norway, and then obviously traveled to Iceland between 5 or 10 years old. Or she might have been of mixed blood and born into a Viking settlement on the Scottish Isles. The date on the young woman's tooth is consistent with her arrival at any time during the period of settlement into the late 10th century. Yet the dates on the clothes in which she was buried strongly suggest that she was either a very early immigrant or a valued member of a community in eastern Iceland who dressed her for death in clothes that had been woven there using the wool of sheep from local flocks at the start of its settlement. So she was either there at the very beginning and was using clothing made just out of the first sheep because that's her time, or she was so important that, like you said, those clothes were for her, like they were intentionally given to her for some reason.
I mean, they have to go to a lot of, like, clothes equal man hours and resources, like precious resources, like to a degree that we can't even comprehend anymore.
Yeah, and we said this the other day when we were talking about this in the beginning, that no matter what this woman's life actually entailed, the way that she is displayed in her death says a lot about who is presenting her and who they're presenting it to. Some modern stuff about Iceland, I guess. They are today in agriculture. They are self-sufficient in terms of fresh food and dairy products. So that's kind of cool. They're also, all of their like major cities are powered with like geothermal energy and stuff. But they do have like the highest emissions of like any country or something like that. I can't remember the exact statistic, but they use a lot of energy despite, their like clean energy practice. So who knows what's going on in Iceland. It's amazing that such a small country would carry that weight,
My favorite fact about Iceland is that it is the only place in the world that you can watch the continental crust spreading. And you can actually stand and touch like those two main pieces of the Earth's crust at the same time, like the Pacific and Atlantic at the same time or something like that. Or it's two different continents, like you're touching North America and England or Europe at the same time.
I've seen pictures of that, like a big snowy crevice and people like jumping over it essentially.
Yeah.
Iceland is on my list of places to go. Like it is an amazing, I really want to see the puffins. There's like puffins that nest there yearly. Oh my god, I want to see a puffin so bad.
Puffins are big in Alaska too. And that's actually, and that's where I'm from, just for everybody else. But at all of the diners and everything, they used to have these signs all the time that would have a puffin on it, and it would have a puffin with a cigarette in its mouth and say, "No puffin."
I love that.
Instead of "no smoking."
Creative as shit.
Yeah, it was so cute. Alaska is a cute place, and a terrifying place, but also a cute place.
I feel like that's half of its charm. It's got like this cottagecore horror vibe.
Oh, absolutely.
Cities in Alaska or something.
I want to say part of the horror of the story was the isolation too. Like I think it was Fairbanks because I think you had to take an airplane to get in and out, which is the only way you can get to Fairbanks.
Yes.
Is by plane.
That's crazy. Let's get to the Lady in Blue. Like I said, she was found in 1938 when they were constructing a road near a farm in eastern Iceland.
Where were they building it to?
I don't know where it was going.
Okay.
That's a good question.
All right.
No one ever talks about that. They just say they were building it.
They just say they were building it. Okay.
Yeah, no information on that.
Well, there's a conspiracy theory incoming on this one, guys and girls. I just think it's a little weird that we know that they were building a road in 1938, but we don't know where they were building it to. chime in the comments if we ever get any. And tell me if you think this is bullshit or you have a better idea.
I'll quote, in 1938, workers disturbed her burial during road construction at the farm of Kettelstadier, I think that's what it is, Kettelstadier. Soon after, the grave was excavated by the National Museum of Iceland, revealing the partial remains of a young woman buried with the items of Viking age Norse clothing and dress. For many years, no one questioned her identity or affiliation, assuming that she was a Norse woman based on the objects that accompanied her. Her burial could be considered among the wealthiest from Iceland's settlement period, 1870 to 930 AD, due to her relatively abundant...
870, I'm sorry.
870, yeah, not 1870, 870. It's weird. You can't get used to, like, three-digit years. Like, it feels really weird. She kind of was forgotten about, and they rediscovered a jar of formaldehyde and this woman's partially preserved jaw and cheekbone, essentially. They found a part of her jaw with a tooth and some mandible flesh, which is your jaw and mouth. And they found that in 2015. They just found it in the basement of, like, the Icelandic Museum.
It was just chilling down there in formaldehyde.
Yeah, like, what else do they have in the bottom of all the fucking basements? You know, I love Astonishing Legends. We're going to quote them in our very first show.
Shout out to Astonishing Legends.
Shout out. They're the podfathers. They're amazing. They do this episode on Kincaid's Cave, and it's this guy who, like, early or late 1800s went to Arizona supposedly on this trip and found this cave with, like, oriental artifacts in it and stuff, and they, like, debate whether it's a prank or whether it really happened. But they talk about how stuff goes missing all the time. Like, and that people, like, it's not a system, you know, no one's looking over them all the time. They're just put on a shelf and documented that they're there. And it's crazy what can be found if we, like, dig through the basements. If we had the funding, probably. It's probably a funding issue like everything else is, right?
Yeah. You know it. This was fascinating. And, I took note of how she was found because it was just so cool to imagine. According to the article, the lady was found, and I quote, resting on her left side in a flexed position. Her knees and hips were bent, and the left side of her face touched one of the two oval brooches that would originally have been located on her breast. Other grave goods included a trefoil brooch, 42 beads, textile fragments, 2 whetstones, bone fragments of either a comb or a knife handle, a spindle whorl, and a stone of unusual shape, which proved to be fragments of chalcedony. So I had to go look up what that rock was, and apparently it's a type of silica. So it looks like a creamy, cloudy quartz crystal, though, and it's really, really beautiful. And I'm obsessed with rocks and quartz crystal, and so I had to definitely check that out.
So let's talk a little bit about her jewelry.
Ooh.
That was awesome, by the way. Thank you. Sorry, I was just distracted. That sounded so dismissive. Like, oh, yeah. Like, shut up, Stella. No, okay, I love you. I know that she had 42 beads, which is quite a lot. And beads are specific to Icelandic graves. Like Norse Viking age graves don't often include beads, but they are basically a requirement of an Icelandic, or not requirement, what's the word? They always show up in Icelandic.
It's tradition.
Yes, it's traditional. Just like, you know, the women's brooches that are like in every Viking age grave, essentially. They kind of think, oh, that's what I wanted to say earlier. They kind of think that these brooches might be like a wedding ring. Like a status indicator, like that, you know, like that's the ubiquity of it. Like, and remember earlier we were talking, we recorded a whole episode and then realized that our audio sucked, so we had to re-record it.
I already blocked that out in my memory. It didn't. It did not happen.
It didn't. But we talked about, you know, what if someone like found one of our skeletons in a grave in, you know, 1,000 years. How would they determine our wealth or our culture? And it would probably be our jewelry, right? Like, that's the one thing that a lot of people are buried with is, like, maybe their wedding ring or, like, either something beautiful, even if it wasn't necessarily personal to them. But that's because that's how we bury people in our culture. And that's what I love so much about this story is like imagining how she was as a real person. I mean, I was a historical interpreter for a long time, and you learn how to get into like historical people's frames of mind, and that's what I love so much is just imagining what this woman's life was really like.
I have a theory that, I mean, after what we've read and kind of putting a context to what would have been going on around her in her life, I feel like she was some sort of spiritually significant person. Like, I don't have any proof for this, but I just get the feeling that she was like a seer or some sort of wise woman, maybe somebody that had been picked for it from birth. And like that could also explain how, which I don't know if we mentioned this or not, but her clothes are older than she is. Mm-hmm. So the clothes that she's wearing are like particularly designed for a burial purpose, and they are actually older than the woman who's wearing them, which opens up all of these questions of, where did those clothes come from? What's the significance of that? Like, why hold on to something for so long to use it for this? Which, if she were some kind of maybe, let's say, mythical figure or mystical figure in society, that maybe it was something that had been decided from birth. Maybe it was, maybe there had been some sort of sign and that was to be her fate. But it's really sad to think of her being dying, obviously, in the spring of her beauty, like her bloom. Yeah, but I wonder what she would have gone on to be.
They estimate that she was 17 to 25 when she died. And
just the best time.
Yeah, I mean, the prime of your life, I mean, especially in that era when you probably lived just a little bit shorter. Their lifespans weren't horribly short. But yeah, God, I had something amazing to add to that, and I totally lost it. Oh, can I tell you my theory?
Yes.
I'm gonna go with a little less mundane, but still a very important, like cool to me theory.
Sure.
I think that she might have been. I don't think she might have been a Viking woman, like from Norway. I think she was probably born in Scotland in a Viking colony. Maybe she was half, Scottish. Maybe she was the daughter of a slave or a slave herself. I believe that she became a married woman living in a Norse culture who adopted the culture, and that she was a very powerful woman. So they called in some parts of Scandinavian culture, they called women who ran like large households and who were important, they called them Freyas, because you were essentially like this idealized version of your goddess, because that was Freya's domain, was the household and being this idealized feminine thing, which I think is really empowering, and I really love that. So I think that this woman and her Freya like grave goods maybe just represent this woman who was really valued in her society, no matter where she came from.
The head of the family.
Yeah, exactly. The matriarch. Even
very young matriarch.
Even at 23, she could have had several children already and been running a house. So I mean, I don't think she was. I don't know if she was super powerful, but I think that she was really, really well respected.
And we're back.
I love that so much.
Thanks.
Okay. So I want to talk a little more about the jewelry on the Lady in Blue. Some of her beads were made of jet and or lignite, and jet was only found in southern Scotland and England, I guess, at the time. And she also had a large amber bead, which they think might have come out of England. There was around actually Viking Jorvik. There was like amber mines, which is kind of cool. Freya's necklace, bring in someone. I'm butchering all these words. Bringing someone. Nope, that's even worse than before. It's made of either amber or gold, they think. So in the myths, so that's kind of cool. So yeah, she has that connection to Scotland, and so they kind of make this conclusion at the end. They'll wrap everything up nicely, but they essentially say that she was probably born in Scotland or moved there as a very young woman. So,
oh yeah, I actually, I looked a little bit into this too, and I think it all fits into the let's just say, suffice to say, it makes sense. Okay, that's all I want to say for now. It makes sense.
I want to describe her brooches a little more because the symbology is really cool. But I also want to quote this last paragraph about the jewelry because I think you'll really love it.
Right on.
So they say the piece of chalcedony in or near the hands of the Kittelstadier woman potentially also points towards beliefs in the symbolic of or amuletic properties of stones. Its blue shade is a color commonly associated with death and burial in Norse contexts, and it is known as the ghost stone in Icelandic. They do imply that she might have like some spiritual, beliefs.
So I actually did go in and look up just some of the mystical properties of the stone, and the first result on Google says that it is a nurturing stone that promotes brotherhood and goodwill. It absorbs negative energy. It brings the mind, body, emotions, and spirit into harmony. Um, and it instills feelings of benevolence and generosity. And my main question, though, would be, is that according to who? Because I mean,
Yeah.
how common is this rock? I mean, it looks to me from the pictures, it looks like it would be found on every continent in the world.
Yeah, and
It's a type of silica, so it can't be that uncommon, right?
yeah, that's my thing with most crystals is like these, and a lot of witchcraft, honestly, like the meaning that we place on a certain herb, crystal, piece of metal, like whatever it is, that is entirely what we make it. Like I think that what you believe makes it true, and so the meanings don't really mean anything,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes
And so
perfect
that's
sense.
really cool, but you also can't say that that's what it meant to her because
Yeah.
her culture could have had a completely different understanding of rocks and crystals and
Well, when you say it that way, it also kind of hits me like, you can never guess why. You can never
True.
really guess why somebody does something.
That's why it's so hard
Because we're human beings.
in anthropology, because we're human beings and
everything's
we
made
have
up.
we have creative minds that make things up and make new cultures and ideas and this society we can learn all we want about what we found and what we have written down, but we have zero idea what it was like to actually live in it and the intricacies of it. And that's what's so cool about it. Oh, and blue is interesting because blue is like a color of burial, they think, and death in Scandinavian culture. Something like 65% of women buried in Iceland are wearing blue and 31% of men. So that's pretty cool. Who knows? I mean, I wonder if blue was just like a formal color or if it actually means death, because like our perspective is different.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also imagining like I'm still just I can't get over the fact that those clothes that she's buried in are older than her. It makes me wonder like
Yes.
did she carry them with her throughout her life?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you think like taking it from settlement to settlement, which obviously, I know we've talked about before that they know from drilling into one of her teeth and her jawbone,
Yeah.
all of the various times in which her diet changed throughout her life. So I wonder, did she take those clothes with her at every point in her life? Is it something that she was gifted as a child, or was there some kind of community chest sort of thing where they kept these things and but because you never know who's going to be first or who's going to go.
And there is significant trade network. I mean, that's what the Vikings were about. They were
clearly,
traders.
yeah, like
so there are goods that she has that they say, like some of her beads, where they're like, these are clearly from the Mediterranean, but we don't know if this woman went to the Mediterranean. We can't say because she definitely had access to all kinds of goods like that. And that's what I was just getting to with her clothes. This is perfect. So she was wearing 4 different types of textiles, or that's what they found. 4 different types of textiles were identified. And they think there was a 5th type, likely, but they're not sure, which is kind of crazy. I mean, that's a lot of clothing items to be buried in.
Sure.
Do you think that there was ever like concern about burying people in usable items? Like, I mean, obviously it had to be a prosperous community, right? If they're not like saving clothing for other people to wear, like they're burying someone in perfectly good clothing. I guess if that's such a part of your religious practice, you wouldn't even think about it.
Well, yeah, I mean it's natural. We're not even the only mammals that bury their dead with reverence, and Yeah. I mean, I think the symbolic, I think that's actually part of when they started to define us as human as we know it, right? The first signs of early ritualistic practices in humans of um, burying people with tools.
Yeah.
And, things like that. And I know there's even pits where they would throw the bodies into pits and they would throw, like, maybe their own tools or something connected to them down into the pit with them.
I just saw the other day, I should have read the article and saved it, but I saw an article about a woman. They found like a cave woman who was buried with a puppy. Like she was
Wow.
buried with her head resting on her dog.
Oh,
And it's like the earliest example of domestication.
yeah.
It's really beautiful. It makes me want to be buried with my dog. I think
Aw.
I'm gonna, like, if my puppies die, I'm gonna cremate them and then have their ashes buried with me. Is that creepy?
I don't judge anybody on that kind of stuff.
True.
I mean, no, like that. There's so many different. There's no normal.
Yeah.
It's all made up. Everything's fake. Absolutely
So,
everything we do is made up.
yeah, nothing matters. We're just apes on a rock,
Meat
honestly.
bags.
But she was buried in blue, like I said, which is a color commonly found in death. She did have a lot of her beads, they were yellow or probably made to look gold or bronze when she was wearing them, but then now they look yellow. And that was a color highly, strongly associated with Freya. So just a little more evidence that she might have been a worshiper of Freya or, in some way important when it came to that part of their religion.
You got more to say
I
about
want
her
to go back to
clothes?
her brooches because her brooches are amazing. So these are the ubiquitous brooches that like you see on any historical reproduction. We found them in a ton of Viking graves all over the place. And they're huge, they're kind of oval shaped. The symbolism of these things is awesome. Like, so it seems a little crude when I first heard about it. I was like, oh wow, that's kind of like ugh, gross. But they symbolize like a second set of nipples. Like,
Nice.
so they rest either on the tops of your breasts or like right above.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like to represent fertility, because it's like a sow. Like, I guess Freya was associated with a sow, because they have
Nice.
lots of litters. Like, it seems weird now, but I guess if you just think
Lots
of
of
it,
titties, milk,
it's just
feed
our weird
people.
association with pigs now.
Yeah.
Like, they probably didn't have those associations.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so they're beautiful. And her brooches aren't even like the most ornate, they say. I haven't seen all of them, but they say that they're just like a common pair, but they look super cool. They have 9 was kind of a really special number in Scandinavian religion, and they have originally like 9 little like teats on them, it looks like. And this is, you can see where the one was damaged by the construction. They like pointed out because it's missing some things on it. But look at them. They're just so ornate, and they were probably golden at one point. Like they were bronze to look like golds. They used tissue from one of her teeth to estimate her time of death and to assess whether the clothes were contemporary to her burial or heirlooms given to her as a ritual. The dental sample was taken from a tooth that formed when the woman was 2 to 3 years old. And there's like a whole page of what they actually did to it with all of these like chemical names and stuff, and it's very intense.
That's wild.
So
That's
let
really
me
interesting to like really get into the core.
honestly, like they really,
No.
it's cool that they lay
Study.
all that out. Yeah, that's what I love about scientific papers is that usually, I mean, you don't have to be that into it, but if you want to deep dive, you can deep dive. Yeah, so they talk about how like terrestrial animals like the sheep sometimes grazed on seaweed, and like seaweed isotopes age differently than grass isotopes, and so like they get into that. It's just really crazy. So the date from the woman's tooth originally suggested she was born before AD 900. But her clothes, let me see. They remodel that number based on that sea. So like the seaweed fucks it up, I guess. Like the seaweed, like because it ages differently, it messes with their numbers.
To
So
be
they,
honest, seaweed's kind of bitchy.
okay, so I tried seaweed. Like my friend Matthew at work, he was like, I love roasted, crunchy seaweed. And I was like, oh, that sounds good. So next time I went to Kroger, they had like on the clearance rack, it was like $1 of this little like sample lunch pack of dried seaweed with like salt on it. I was like, oh, great. So I tried it. Fucking disgusting. It tastes like fish skin, like, and not even like trout skin, which I can eat. Like, it just tastes like fish.
Well, I wouldn't judge all of it like that though, because some types of seaweed that you can buy from the store just taste kind of crunchy and salty and sort of like, inert.
Yeah.
Just like crunchy and salty and like can actually be a pretty good choice.
I'll have to try seaweed on a different day.
I like the black kind. Like, I don't know. I don't know if that's like a kind, but it's like very dark colored.
I've never seen more than one type of seaweed, but I wouldn't doubt that there's a whole litany of seaweed you can eat.
There's some of the crazy seaweed that used to wash up on the beaches in Alaska. I'm sure it still does.
Eat it?
Just, no, I wouldn't eat it, but there were these ones that, it was like kelp, I think, and it had this huge bulb at the bottom. It looked like a humongous, pale sea green onion. like
fennel, but from the sea.
But it had like a big bulb with like little hairs
onions
on it. And exactly. And we used to swing them around, and they were like full of fluid, and we would like, they were dead and washed up, so we would just swing them around and then smack it, and you could smack like the bulb part of it on the ground, and it would like, all this liquid would come out and just like go everywhere. It was so satisfying. And the splunk noise.
Oh, I used to love smashing hedge apples, like Osage orange fruit. Like, they're those big, brainy looking green fruits. Oh, they're so much fun to run over with cars and shit.
Oh, that's cool.
We were little hellions.
Yes, destruction. I love
it. So they kind of sum up her clothing here. And they say that they approximately can date her date of birth with a 68% probability that she was born between 891 and 965 AD. So born in that settlement period. And they think that she was probably born either in Norway or in the British Isles, and then moved between the ages of 5 to 10 to Iceland, because her diet significantly changes from terrestrial protein to about half and half marine protein and terrestrial protein, which suggests, that she's moving to a more marine protein environment. Oh, that was a long one.
I like it. I like it a lot.
But here's the kicker. But there's more. Wait. I remember Billy Mays. It's so sad how he died.
Mays here. Yeah.
Rest in peace, Billy Mays.
Rest in peace, King.
The clothes that she was buried in were probably woven well before she was born, as many as 50 to 60 years before she was dressed in them for her burial. So, even at the earliest dates of her birth, they're still, older than her, which brings it, back to your point. Like, why was she buried in these? Her jewelry was current at the time of her death. And even if, like I said, even if she was born at that late time, it's only 10 to 20 years old, still her clothing are, so.
I mean, it could also make a lot of sense that she had some connection to, like, merchants or traders.
Exactly.
And that could have offered her a variety of garments of various ages, as well as, the most contemporary fashions, it sounds like.
And they say, in, a lot more eloquent and longer words, that her burial has a lot of elements of two cultures, or three cultures. So she is typically buried in Norse, tradition. We thought she was a Norse woman for many years because, she wears the same style of clothing. She has the brooches. She has the beads. That is all Norse culture. But she has these Scottish jet beads that only come from Scotland. And she's also buried in a similar style in Scottish burials. So maybe some of her family was from there. And they kind of speculate on were those clothes heirlooms, maybe, that were supposed to reflect her diversity in her family. So I don't know. They could say that she could be anyone. She could have been a slave. She could have been an important woman. She could have just been an average person. I don't know. What do you think? I want to know what you think.
Do you want to know what I think, or do you really want to know what I think?
Both.
Okay. Well, I think that she's somebody that we can only ever speculate about. But what we can know about her that leads to even bigger and better questions. I love the world that it opens up. Mm-hmm. And it could be any one way in which you begin to trace the entirety of human history. And I just like to think about the things that kind of don't change. Like there's so many things in common that, you know, that I feel like persist. Like I just would love to be buried like that. If I was going to be buried, you know, I that would be wonderful to have. I mean, I love rocks.
And
She loves rocks.
Heirloom clothing.
That's what I'm getting at, really, is like, obviously she and I both love shiny things. Yeah.
And heirloom clothing.
I've got crystals I'd love to be buried with, you know, and so it's just really, really cool. It speaks a
lot to like this kind of modern trend too of like local stuff. You know, she was buried in this clothing that was shorn from sheep from the very first flocks raised there by her people, and that kind of says something, and it speaks a tiny little bit to me going to the farmer's market and like eating food grown, you know, on the land that I live on. Like it's kind of, I don't know, it gives me those vibes.
I get the sense though too, with obviously as much as she had traveled, she was clearly very well traveled, and you know,
and as a child too.
Yeah,
like traveling as a child,
exactly. That's crazy. And that's why I was suggesting like maybe the connection to being a merchant, because like a merchant family, because then that would make sense why, you know, it would just be an easy way to explain why a child would be traveling around. So one final observation that I wanted to make about the lady in blue, like given that her clothes were on fleek, given that you know, she was just obviously stunting like from the grave. And she traveled. We know that she traveled a lot, and that she was obviously a very worldly, very well-traveled person. What I'm trying to say is, I'm pretty sure that if she were alive today, she would be an Instagram influencer. And I feel like if that was a thing, like back in the day, I feel like people would be following her on Instagram. And like I don't know. I mean, and it seems kind of glib to say something like that, but then it actually does, I think, lead to this interesting mental exercise of thinking about what kind of things would she post? Like, what were the sights that she saw? Because we know that she traveled, like, so many places and did so many things.
I would just, you know...
Well, don't you wish you could follow her Instagram?
I would just die to see... Right? Like, it's a dream of mine to see a lot of untouched places. You're right. It would be so amazing. You know what I think is more impressive is the fact that a young child sailed across a motherfucking ocean in like a longship. I really want to ride in a longship one day. I really want to go to Norway. They have a museum.
Do they do that?
Well, there was scientists who like made one. There's a YouTube video. We should link it where they recreate one and then they go sailing, and it looks dangerous as hell. Like it looks like you could just fall out of the boat at any minute. And I'm just imagining like a bunch of little girls like wee like like oh, I can't even imagine. Can I give you my thoughts?
Sure.
I think this is going to sound so dorky. I think it's almost more romantic to imagine that she was just a really beloved woman in her community. Like, I think that... God, you're looking at me like, fuck, that's so boring.
No. I was just going to say, porque no los dos.
What's that mean?
That means, why not both?
Well, yeah, exactly. No, I'm focusing less on the mythical aspect of it. I'm focusing more on, like, I think it can be said for sure that she was very well respected in her community and that she had probably accomplished things. And I think that's awesome that, you know, this much time later, what is it, 2,000 years or 1,000 years? That's what we can infer about her, you know, is her power.
Yeah.
Like, cool. How cool to be, your bones accidentally stumbled upon one day. Say she was, you know, a great Freya, or a lady of a house who, maybe she died, you know, having a kid or like in some honorable way, and they wanted to honor her the best way they could, you know, and this was just the way they, you know, like in some really special clothing. I don't know. I mean, it could be something as mundane as that.
It's so amazing that this woman in blue is able to tell us about so many different facets of a people and a culture and a time and a place. So I guess we were just really lucky that she wasn't destroyed and that she was able to tell her story.
I agree. I think that I love that she teaches us so much about her culture and her exact point in time. And what kind of fate that preserved, her teeth just so we could learn that much about her. So thanks for listening to Everything Under the Moon
With Mel and Stell.